Hi everyone, and welcome to this POW Pledge guidance video on Pledge 5, which is reducing those emissions. So reducing those high impact emissions, other than we've already looked at within the pledge. So we've already looked at renewable electricity, heating, and vehicles, particularly vehicles within your own control. So now we want to identify where are the biggest causes of emissions to you other than that, and what can we do to start drawing these down to start reducing those emissions. And this is really important. It comes to the concept of materiality, of focusing on what's important. So we don't want to focus on straws in the canteen if we're a aviation company. Okay, so let's look at some what's important to you as a business now. And this works in tandem with Pledge 6, where Pledge 6 is net zero, that long term, where do we need to be at 2030, where do we need to be at 2040, 2050? This is just, that's too far away. So let's get started before we look at the long term. So firstly, we're going to list out all the activities that your business directly controls that emits greenhouse gases. For everything from customer travel, your own business travel, commuting, use of your products and manufacture of your products, both in the supply chain and in the use phase, any indirect emissions as well. So you can use our workbook to start working through this, and you'd use this first column to say, what is this activity that's going to cause emissions? And there's a list of example categories here. So purchase goods and services is often a big one, but you might want to add some more further clarity within this. So you might want to add the raw materials, the actual finished product, or packaging if you're a brand, for example, or a retailer. If you're a travel company or tour operator or chalet company, this will look a bit different. As a chalet company, it might be cleaning materials, energy should have already been covered. So any other purchases and travel of guests is probably an activity that you can cover. Staff travel and like any movement of stuff within resort and so on. Okay, jumping back to the guidance documents. So firstly, identifying what all those activities are you can think of. And if you're unsure about how to go about this, it might be a good chance to do some carbon literacy training with us. So then trying to identify what you have measures for. So if you have any data on some of these, you can find if you've got the spend on them, a quantity or a count or weight, fuel measurements, any data you can find for these will start to be useful. So see what you already have. And particularly if you can gather that for a full year, that will help you to do a year's worth of measurement and make it clearer where that carbon footprint is. So yeah, it's usually convenient to do a financial year. So really what you're then trying to do is identify those few carbon hotspots, so-called, or sort of high impact areas from your organization that you want to focus on. And these are the ones that would probably then want to focus the most effort on having a decent measure of. So yeah, try and find which are most important to you. And the next slide I'll do a sneak preview of will help to give you a bit of a guide of where that's likely to be. But it depends on your type of business. So if you're at a bigger business, if you are a bigger business, you'll probably have a carbon inventory, a carbon footprint for the various activities. So you could actually see the tons of CO2, particularly for the more direct emissions. You might even be legally required to gather some of that data for SECR compliant legislation. So otherwise, if you're a smaller business, you could just estimate or even just say, we think these are the 3 highest, and not worry too much if you're a micro business about like the actual like numbers behind it. Yeah, so far we've worked out, okay, I as a brand want to focus on the materials we use in the packaging, or I as a tour company tour operator want to focus on customer travel and chalets. So then it's looking at how you can measure and monitor those high emissions, as just starting to talk about. For those key areas, if you're a bigger business, you might have to do it, as I say, for everything, but as a smaller business, you can at least estimate for those specific areas where you are, so you can start to get a feel for if you're making a difference or what would make a difference, and then work on that plan to reduce those unavoidable emissions. It should be relatively it should be doable to work out what that is. Like if it's travel, it's putting people like flying less far and trying to avoid flying where possible. For example, materials, it's using recycled materials. And so again, if you want to use this spreadsheet, it would be, you've got like the example of what you're looking at, then put as many examples as you can think of that you can implement into the steps to cut now. That was just talking about reducing material use, using recycled materials. And yeah, if you need further help with this one, talk to POW Consultancy. So what you'll need is that spreadsheet, or you could do it in your own spreadsheet if that one you prefer to use a different file type, for example. Yeah, you might want to talk to other departments to get that data. And then we have 2 other slides on this pledge. There is this one that's a bit more sector specific information. So it helps to give you an idea of where your high carbon footprint likely is as this type of business. So if you're a micro business, you might want to just directly look at those. If you're a bigger business, you probably are thinking about doing carbon footprinting anyway, doing a carbon inventory and working out which it truly is. So that should then help you identify which ones to focus on. And then there's further guidance depending on which type of business you are about, other resources you might want to look at. Whether you're a brand, there's some interesting legislation coming in about product environmental footprint measuring. So it'll be like a food wheel that shows currently on food like how healthy it is based on the proteins and the fats and so on. There'll be something that shows what the carbon footprint and maybe the water footprint is of a product. So, you know, starting to produce those product footprints start to become important, and keep an eye on that legislation and what measurements you need on the product level. We'll get you ahead of the game on that. It should be coming in within the next year or 2. And there's some additional information depending if you're cycling and manufacturing, also further guidance for retailers, travel and tourism. As I mentioned, it's probably in your customer travel, but if you're an actual chalet company, it might be that your customer travel, you don't book it and you don't really have control of it. And as a chalet company, you might want to focus more on energy use or other areas. But if you can influence it, it could be things like discounts for customers that came by train or without flying, for example. Medium Production Albert has some really great toolkits and further training and information available. And events and destinations, there's an additional checklist of actions you could take. And then there's some further more general guidance, the difference between carbon neutral and net zero, and talking about offsets. We don't really want to focus on offsetting. We can't offset the global emissions that we're currently causing. It just wouldn't be possible to absorb that amount of emissions. So really we need to focus on reducing is the whole point. But yeah, some further information to start to get the grip between that and the next question. And then some further carbon footprinting software system references, business travel and shared things that should apply to most type of business, and guidance to if you want further help. So that's about it for Pledge 5. How detailed that plan needs to be does depend on the size of your business, but it's just starting to work out, yeah, where are those high emissions causes, and having a specific plan for what you can do about those. If you can't do one like as you work through the worksheet, it's setting a specific date of like, we will create a working group, or I, within my remit as having responsibility for sustainability, will do this by this date within a year. So maybe at the end of the next financial year, we'll have sign off of the plan to reduce emissions in the next 2 years, something like that. So that's really what we're looking for, a clear deadline for a clear plan that will cut emissions by that 7% at least a year that we need to see continually to get to net zero. Okay, that's it for Pledge 5.